Raether. It's case number 21 CF 2933. Appearances, please.
ADA DeMarco appearing on behalf of the state.
Good afternoon. Gregg Raether is here with us in custody. He's represented today's hearing by Diana Van Rybrook. I do have a copy of the criminal complaint. Mr. Raether, did you receive one?
I just received it, ma'am.
Okay.
I didn't know I was being charged with this until I just received this.
Okay. Well, let's let the record reflect that Mr. Raether did receive the criminal complaint. We can waive its reading. Ask you to note this is a special appearance. We did not get a chance to interview Mr. Raether to see whether or not he qualifies for the public defender representation.
All right, let's have the deputies give him information about how to call the public defender's office to apply. Looks like he just got that sheet now. He is in custody on a hold. I think it stems from a number of matters, but including a case that was Judge Elkey's. The rotation system would then suggest that we need to assign this case to Judge Highland. Let's start with the state for its position regarding bail.
Yes, Your Honor, at this time, the state would be requesting cash bail in the amount of $500,000. The state would also like to make a record that were it possible, the state would be recommending pretrial services with GPS monitoring, where pretrial services taking new referrals. I understand that that is not the case, so I simply want to make that record in terms of outlining the state's position on the matter. The state would ask that as conditions of bail, the defendant have no contact with BLB or any member of BLB's family, including but not limited to RL, TM, and LBK. The defendant be banned from BLB's residence, and that the defendant not leave the state of Wisconsin without court approval. In support of this recommendation, Your Honor, I would note that high cash bail in the state's view is very necessary given the exposure that the reckless homicide charge carries in addition to the other charges. The state's position is that that heightened exposure does create a flight risk. In addition, the court may consider under Wisconsin statute 969.01 the gravity of the offense and the nature, including whether or not it was violent. And as an attempted homicide charge, it is essentially the ultimate form of violence here. I do believe that that is a proper consideration under the statute as recited, and therefore that does outline the state's position on the amount of cash bail being sought, as well as the non-monetary conditions.
Ms. Van Rybrook, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Your Honor. Thanks for the chance to speak to Mr. Raether. Well, $500,000 cash bail is incredibly high request. I heard nothing from the state about any missed court appearances in the past for Mr. Raether. I know he's had court in the past. He managed to get himself last year an attorney and to get himself reinstated, as you described, that hold on probation. And so he had been sitting out recently a 90-day sanction, which was due to expire tomorrow. And instead, what happened was the state brought charges now 89 days after his arrest last September. And here we are on the cusp of his release from probation from that hold, facing an extremely serious charge. I have to say that this criminal complaint that I had a chance to read is certainly voluminous. I don't know that I've seen recently anyway, a first-degree reckless homicide charge that required 24 pages of narrative. And in reading it, I don't see any specific language that supports the charge that Mr. Raether recklessly caused PAM's death. I would ask you to consider much, much lower bail. I recognize that if you feel that there's probable cause that would support count one, and I realize there are other counts in the complaint, that it be significantly lower. $5,000 is more in line with what this should be. Mr. Raether's been a Wisconsin resident, in fact, a Madison, Dane County resident his entire life. He's been working for the past year and a half, 2 years at Coin Painting here in town, so he has good work history. And again, I've never heard, or I didn't hear the state mention anything about missed court appearances. So for all these reasons, Mr. Raether is very much interested in staying nearby if, in fact, his probation is not revoked, or if they don't attempt to revoke his probation, and they may at this point, given the charge that has now been brought by the state. He has every intention of sticking around and fighting this case. So for all those reasons, I ask you to consider cash in the amount of $5,000.
And Ms. DeMarco, I should give you a chance to reply.
Well, Your Honor, I would need time to re-review the criminal complaint in light of the circumstances. I would note that, as I mentioned in my earlier argument, that the court may consider under the bail statute the gravity of the offense as well as the nature of the offense, including whether or not it was a violent offense. As I've pointed out, the charge in this complaint as to count 1 as it relates to Mr. Raether, that almost certainly fits squarely within that definition. Again, this does create a large amount of exposure, which does create an incentive to flee. As for the volume of the complaint, I don't know that it's really necessary to address that. I would note that in cases such as this, where there are quite serious charges being brought against individuals, there is likely a necessity for quite a bit of investigation to make sure that the state has all of the requisite information before moving forward with charges. This was the case here, which would explain why this complaint was not issued until sometime after the offense was committed. I do understand that that puts people at a bit of an inconvenience, but I would also represent that the state is absolutely held to the standard to do the best investigative work possible. And in cases such as this, it's simply not possible to do so immediately after the fact when there's so much detail that goes into an investigation, as is here.
Well, I have had a chance to review the allegations in the criminal complaint. I had a chance to review it actually on Friday because in connection with the request for a warrant for the co-defendant. It's not clear whether I'm being asked to specifically make a determination of probable cause, but I guess I always look at that question when trying to decide any bail issue, because it's the most fundamental thing is there evidence in the complaint to support the allegations? If there isn't, it wouldn't make any sense to go forward and deal with bail in any way. I think this complaint is supported by probable cause without getting into a great deal of detail that is contained within the criminal complaint. There's certainly probable cause to believe that there was an extraordinarily violent encounter between the defendant and the victim. There's also reason to believe that, at least from the perspective of what's alleged here, that she was essentially left for dead without assistance. I don't know specifically if the state's prosecution or theory of prosecution here is the physical encounter or the failure to get help or a combination of those things, but I think under either analysis, there's probable cause to support the charges. They're extraordinarily serious charges. He's on some form of supervision. He is apparently a prior convicted felon based on some information in the complaint. And this complaint is lengthy in part because it goes through a great deal of effort to describe the efforts apparently taken by Mr. Raether to get his story straight with the co-defendant. And it describes efforts to essentially create false evidence in the way of dealing with telephones and debit cards and the like. I think it's a very serious set of charges. It will ultimately be up to the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt those charges, but there is at a minimum very strong evidence of criminal activity and serious criminal activity described in this complaint. It calls for a very substantial bail, and I'm going to adopt the state's recommendation. I'll set cash bail at $500,000 cash. I'll adopt the various requested conditions except the pretrial services request, because as pointed out by Ms. DeMarco, that's not an available option right now. They're closed to new referrals. I'm not permitted to refer people to that program at present. I assume we ought to get them a prelim within the next 10 days?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll do that. Good luck, Mr. Raether. I hope things get better.